Sweet. Right, we are live. Hello, YouTube. Welcome along. Welcome to Effective Communication in the Workplace, Real versus Virtual. A quick rundown of events coming up. We do have a pencil on next week with something in the works, but I'll let you know further details on that as it comes up. Following week, we're taking a dive into Laravel with event-driven development, not possibly with the observer design pattern. So it's not necessarily strictly for Laravel, could be extended to a whole host of frameworks. We'll also got sessions on Vercel, Statamic, digital investigations with Norfolk Police, an exploration of IoT in the pipeline. As always, virtual social club Fridays, 7:30, 5:30 till late. Join us whenever and however you wish. However you wish sounds really weird, but whenever you wish, drop in, say hi. We're about drop on by. As always, the Discord, there'll be links. I'll be dropping them in the YouTube live chat and in chat in a moment. Join us, bustling community now. And I haven't seen a question that has gone unanswered so far. So bring on the challenge for that. Shout outs this week. I'm going to give anybody an opportunity to do shout outs in both YouTube chat and Zoom chat. So if you've got any opportunities, if you want to just say kudos to somebody, etc., by all means do that now. Otherwise, if you're looking for a job, give us a shout. I've got a whole list of, I'm not going to go through on here. So give us a shout and we'll hook you up. But otherwise, I'm going to get on with it, or get out of the way, and we'll get on with it, and we'll hand swiftly over to Amy. Thanks again, Amy.
Thank you.
If I can find the button. Yeah. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Alice. If I can find my buttons now. Okay. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you all in the virtual sense. Looking at effective communication today. Just a quick thing about me, nothing major. I'm Amy Lethriades. I founded and run a little organisation based in Norwich, Alpha Inclusion and Communication, or Alpha IC. And basically we look at accessibility and skills development for want of a better word, neurodivergence, but in education and the workplace. So let's just get straight on with it, mostly because I try and fit too much into things. So we're gonna get through it, I promise. So looking at the process of communication, a little bit about that, and understanding the elements of that process, and consider those implications on the different types of media and how they help or hinder that process. So not just, this isn't a kind of conversation about Zoom versus Microsoft Teams or anything like that. This is about the process itself, but then looking at, based on that, is it worth real versus virtual for you? So everyone will be in different situations. There's no right answer. It is just about considering things. So I think the first thing to look at is then, what is communication? So interpreting lots of different ways, but the process of creating, transmitting and interpreting ideas, facts, opinions and feelings. So it sounds fairly straightforward. It is also a process of sending and receiving messages. So if we look at it a little bit like that, let's just take a look what that means. So I've got sending and receiving messages. I've got a sports watch. I say sports in the loosest sense of the term. So if I go for a run, my body sends the watch the messages. It receives, interprets those messages, and then it's very intelligent. It can send me messages back. Like goal achieved, and usually more often than not, move is what it tells me. So from a very simplistic point of view, that should be communication. There's no misconceptions, there's no misunderstandings. Very clearly transmitting something backwards and forwards, isn't that communication? Unfortunately not. It would be a lot easier if that was communication, but human to human interaction is a lot more complex than human to watch interaction. Plus, I could just chuck the watch away if I get fed up a bit telling me to move. Not so easy when it comes to humans. Well, not all, but anyway. So it's not just me that says about it being confusing and complicated. Forbes agree, which I'll take that. But from lots of different reasons. So as humans, we don't tend to listen well. We like to do more than one thing at a time. Emotions, they're really annoying, and they get involved when we communicate, and there's nothing we can do about that. Well, there are things we can do, but they can take over. We offer advice that might not be wanted, choose words that can be misconstrued. We'll talk about these kind of elements in a moment as well. And sometimes we're not even aware that we're confusing the people that we're talking to. So it isn't as easy as what goes on between me and my watch. So let's look at the communication process to start with. This is simplified. There is a bit more to it, but we'll look at kind of simplified terms. So you've got one communicator, your encoder, if you like, and they've got a medium that they're going to use. You've then got your other communicator, and they're going to use a medium to transmit messages, and they're the decoder. So they're going to decode what the encoder is sending. You've got the message in between, and then you've got the feedback loop. Okay, so we're going to look at some of those elements. It's nice that some of the language relates across context as well. And then you've got the context, the wider context of where the conversation is happening. So, for example, communication in a small space like a lift, especially at the moment, would be a lot different, say, to what we're doing now, or communicating in a bigger area or from a stage. So there's the context as well. So you can see just from the process itself, there are lots of elements, and all of them have a point where there could be difficulties, or points where you could be more effective in communicating. So let's look at one of the first bits in the message. Just going to move my little bar out of the way. So content of one communicator wishes to send to another. Let me just move myself there. There we go. So it's what we're saying essentially. Thoughts, ideas, and feelings to be encoded. So we get the thought, we get the feeling, it gets encoded, and then we want to transmit it to somebody else. So that's what the message is. And then following that transmission, the person on the other end receiving it decodes it and attaches meaning to it. And then through that feedback loop, that message can be expanded upon, and then further clarification sought. So if we're not sure, we can clarify, or we can seek more information through non-verbal means or other messages that they're giving us. But that's essentially what the message is. It's what we want to say. Then the next element was the media. So each communicator will have a way that they're going to transfer or convey that message. And there's a guy called Fisk, and his information and his use of language around this is still used widely today, even though it was back in the 90s. And he says there are 3 different types of medium that we use. So you've got your presentational, and we'll have a little look at these. We'll go into these a little bit. You've got your representational, and you've got your technological or mechanical. Now we're gonna focus more on the presentational and technological. I will have a look at the representational, but for this today, trying to cut down my my PowerPoint for you, we won't go into that one as much. So each have got their own qualities that affect the way that message is experienced. So that essentially is what we're looking at, is, you know, which way or what form, what medium is best to use. So let's have a look. So presentational, these are going to be the things you're face to face. So meetings, and typically before COVID-19 or the situation or whatever language you want to use around it, there's a potentially misconception, if I'm allowed to say that this was the best way to communicate in every form, in personal and professional relationships. So that's your face-to-face, having a chat, having conversations, and meetings, training in person. So essentially it's that in person, but it includes, there are elements of that presentational that are important. So you've got the verbal element, which is the content of the meaning. But when you've got presentational medium, when you're using a presentational medium, you can also use non-verbal to communicate what your meaning, your message. So that's your body language, your gesture, your eye contact, all those things. Like if someone's being sarcastic, you can pick up because they've just smiled at the same time. There's all those bits that come along with not just speaking, but the non-verbal. And then the paraverbal, which is your pace, which I'm going to probably speed up very close to the end, but it's how people speak. It's the tone, it's the pitch. So you can tell if someone's feeling tired by the way they speak. So it's not what's being conveyed, but it's how it's being conveyed. So in a presentational medium, all of these things are important, and you can access all of that information. Now, when I was writing this, usually this would be in person, but actually, from my experiences over the last few months, some of those elements, the verbal, non-verbal, and paraverbal, can be picked up through some of the technological kind of means, if you like. So video conferencing, and we actually had a quick conversation earlier about how there are some elements that can be picked up, but there are some that are still a bit vague, or you could get misconstrued on video conferencing. So the presentation itself is usually all three of those elements you can use to access the communication, what someone's saying. So technological mechanical medium. So this has obviously been used a lot more recently, but it isn't just the kind of Zooms or the Microsoft Teams or those kind of things, but there are other ways. So radio, television, phone calls, so anything that requires something else to be part of your communication. So internet, which will include a huge range, and I could carry on going for all the different things that we could use. And anyone had like death by Zoom yet will know that there are different options for it, for communicating via the internet. But huge range, and definitely in my team we've used a number of ways, and we've kept some, and we're probably going to drop some, I think. So the third medium was representational. Now I'm mentioning it here, we're not going to go into massive detail, but I think it's really important because sometimes it gets missed out, and this one is things like photographs and paintings and books. So essentially, also architecture. So essentially anything that could say 1,000 words, if you like that phrase. So you don't have to have that person near you or as part of the conversation. It can be exchanged without the communicator physically present, which someone like Banksy with his graffiti, he uses the medium of representational medium, and he doesn't want to be present when people are picking up that message usually. So they're the three media, but there are things to consider, and these are the things I think we're just going to focus on those first two. And these are some of them. These are some of the considerations, but by no means you'll have your own, and especially recent experiences. So the presentational does allow for all of those things we talked about. So the verbal, the non-verbal, and the paraverbal. Now, it's important in some ways to make sure all those elements are there. So an example of this is checking whether someone's all right. I've got an absolutely brilliant office manager. She's superb. She won't mind me mentioning it. She is extremely good at hiding in her voice if she is tired or overworked. I don't overwork. It's just she takes it on. No, I'm joking. So she's good at hiding the paraverbal. She's good at hiding the non-verbal, especially if it's by phone or WhatsApp or any other way. Now, the important thing with presentational is that you get to look at all of those messages, and it was only when I did meet her face to face on the odd occasion, or also obviously with social distancing in place, or also on Zoom, that I could start to tell that actually she wasn't right. Now, she was working from home, and she has 2 children, and so essentially was running two jobs at the same time, and I needed that presentational information. I needed all those 3 areas in order to see that and ask the right questions about, you know, actually, do we need to do something here? So I think in terms of presentational, you have to recognise that there are different elements that you can pick up that you can't in other ways. Also things like, have they received the information the way I intended? If someone gives me a funny look after I've said something, I can very quickly pick up that maybe they didn't quite get the message I'd intended, and there's some sort of miscommunication there. Harder to do that in some forms where it's not presentational, so we'll look at the opposite of that. And also, do they need me to expand further? Now, if I was to do training in your kind of real life, I could very quickly see if someone might be slightly confused, or if indeed you might be falling asleep. Now, I can't see you lot yawning. If you are, I can't adapt how I'm training or kind of conversing with you based on that. I have to just carry on regardless. I guess you could just leave, which would be easier for you. The other thing of presentational is that it allows for more spontaneous sharing of thoughts and ideas, and definitely in our teams, I hadn't realised how much we do this. So if you've got those kind of things that just come to mind and you just want to double check with someone, if you're in the room with them, sometimes that's slightly easier, unless you're more comfortable with doing that on a different kind of media. But when you're used to using presentational, that's a transition that needs to be thought about, because it's one of those things that spontaneous thought and idea, if you're not used to using a technological media, then you're used to using that in-person presentation, you need to consider, I think, what will happen if you want to switch to more technology. The other thing, I'll just move myself again. My bars out the way. So it's about the social elements as well. I was listening to a radio program a couple of days ago, and they were saying that a lot of people don't want to get back to full working in the office, if you like. But one of the key things they might want to do is go back 1 or 2 days a week, simply to be able to have lunch with a colleague that they're missing. So those things that might not seem like work related actually could be quite important for your colleagues, for your businesses, for your workplaces. So, and they can have an impact on relationships, so relationships between colleagues, but also with your clients. So I think we might have mentioned that as well, just sometimes there are offices just for meeting up with clients, but it is something to consider, because when we came out of lockdown, if you like, there was a significant amount of people who were really keen to meet up in real life, when actually they'd been meeting up in other ways through the whole time we were in lockdown. So it does make you think, well, what is it about the presentational that we might need to hold on to or not? And again, that's the question you have to ask yourself. Is it important for me? Is it important for my workplace? Is it important for my friendships as well, from a kind of more personal level? So on another side, in terms of the medium, technological, mechanical things to think about, it does reduce geographical restrictions. So there's not necessarily any need to travel at all. It's been amazing doing webinars and different conversations with people across the country and worldwide. You know, you can do that without having to use any form of transport. And I haven't added on here, but also I don't have to buy very many new clothes at the moment. You know, that's quite handy. I don't have to consider that too much. But you know, seriously, it eliminates things like the risk of transmission, which is obviously a key thing that people are talking about at the moment. But going forward, you know, that could be a consideration all the time. For those that like to get to the point, there isn't necessarily so much need for social chat. You can just get to the point, and even things like an email, you can just jump the bit where someone said, how are you? Or are you having a nice time? And this is what I'm doing. You can just leave that bit and go straight on to the point, if that's what you want to do. So that's an advantage. That's an absolute advantage of the technological. You don't have to worry about the surplus in terms of the social chat. Also, if you weren't someone that was very keen on publicly sharing your thoughts and ideas, now's the time to be alive, because actually it's amazing to be able to share your thoughts and ideas without having the eye contact of people or the worry of people or anything like that. So really important. I just realised, sorry, I've got some chats coming up, so let me see if I can't access them. I will answer your questions afterwards. Okay.
I'll proxy anything that's important at the moment. It's just around the subtitles. I've suddenly become really paranoid that I've missed a "How are you" in our email exchanges. Sorry.
No, it's not compulsory with me. It's fine. But as someone who's a geek in this area, I love to see the difference in email contact. Yeah. It's really interesting. And actually, what's interesting is it seems to be the busier people are, the less they worry about social niceties, which is fine by me. But it's about the other person receiving it. So I'm very conscious. I tend to write an email first, and then I put the social niceties afterwards. Probably shouldn't have given that away, but
sprinkle that with some niceties.
That's right. If it's important for the other person, I think that's the key thing there. Yeah. But I mean, not everyone wants to share things publicly, and publicly could mean 2 or 3 people. It doesn't have to be a huge group of people. I think I've spoken to some people recently who actually that fear and that anxiety about saying what they think and not sure how the other people are going to respond has gone away since being able to use more technological or mechanical ways of sharing. And that has amazing, not just for the individual, but for the companies they work for, because they were missing out all those years on some great ideas simply because they were using potentially not the wrong form of communication, but they were varying their forms of communication. So I think that's really important to think about when you've got this kind of thing. Also, it does reduce the amount of distractions caused by, whether we like it or not, we're trying to process other people's body language and concerns and how you present yourself and all of those things. It eliminates those. So suddenly you're getting to the point, but you're also dealing with the real. So I think that's helpful. You can focus on what the important bit is, if you like. And it offers that chance to process your thoughts first and then review them and edit any messages. So if, for example, you're using email or even WhatsApp or whatever it is, you can do that, then go back over and think, yeah, I might take that swear word out or whatever it is that you popped in that inadvertently. And then you know that the message going across is the one you want them to receive. Or, it might just be that you've realised that you didn't put enough information in, so you can add some more information. So that's something that these forms of communication, this medium helps with, rather than the face-to-face where you have to then rephrase something or you have to go through a longer process. And it potentially is more cost-effective. Something else I used to mention as well, that you can reduce overheads of offices. There's a lot of conversation about that. I would say if it's just a conversation about that, to be aware and be careful. But if it's part of the conversation, I think that's important, definitely. Okay, so that was like the medium, if you like. So that's the message, the media, and the communicators next. So obviously these are key elements of the process, and these are maybe the trickiest elements. So you've got different communicators, different people. And within that, there are lots of factors. So first, we've got their motivation. Just a simple thing, do I want to talk to this person is going to be a part of it. So if I get a phone call and I don't recognise the number, or it's a number, actually recently from Nottingham, I don't know why Nottingham, but they always seem to be from Nottingham at the moment when it's something to do with trying to sell me broadband. So if I recognise that, I've got to, I as a communicator, I can decide that I've got the motivation to communicate back, or even to use the technology to communicate them in the first place. So motivation to communicate is going to be a thing with a communicator. The skills, so everyone's got different levels of skills in communicating with other people, and prefer in terms of written or verbal. So there's different preferences there. Also, the temporary emotional state, at any one time you could be tired or grumpy or excited, and all of those emotions can affect how you respond or communicate with someone else. So there's that element, something which my watch doesn't have to worry about, but I as a human do. Communicating styles, so I'll talk in a minute about different kind of styles of communication and how we have our different preferences and different ways to communicate, which can cause frustration for others, but it's really important to know that differences don't necessarily mean anything bad. It is just a different communicating style. And then things like personality come into it. You could argue introverts, extroverts, all different elements of the personality. Age, now in a presentational style, age and ethnicity and physical appearance, there's a lot of conversation going on about bias. Yeah, all of those elements come into communication, how we view people, how we see people before we even start communicating. So in terms of the communicator as an element of the process, we are quite, obviously a very important element, but also quite a complicated element. So I'm just going to pick up on the communicating styles. So in terms of the styles, there are different types of communicating styles, different types of communicator. And these aren't discrete. You can be a bit of each if you like. It's not that you're one or the other, but you might have your kind of way that you kind of sway towards one or the other. So each style's got specific characteristics, and each style can cause frustrations in others. So I'm smiling because I recognise different people in all of these, and you may as you go through it as well. So you get your kind of active communicators, if you like, and they tend to communicate in a very lively, spontaneous, opportunistic way. Now, as we're going through these, if you kind of start to think about this type of communicator and maybe what their preference for the type of medium they might use, this is where it starts to be where you have to, that kind of interaction between the communicator and the medium itself. So someone who's lively, spontaneous, just likes to chat just for the sake of it. They like to talk about doing things and what they've achieved. So so that, you know, if you want to have a meeting in work, you might talk about what you've achieved in terms of work, but these people might want to just chat about what they've achieved generally anyway, something which is harder to do in some forms, with some forms of media. So they like to be involved in discussions. So it's not just a case of here's an answer or here's the problem, what's the answer. They want to discuss things as they work through the problem, and they don't really like to sit and watch. So you might recognize the active communicator in someone you know. It might be you. Then you get your theorists, and they're people who use this style, who they tend to deliberate during a conversation. So they think very carefully and they review what they hear first, and they respond carefully in the way that most accurately expresses their thoughts on the matter. Now, I hope my sister's not listening. My sister, over the years, I've got a few sisters, but over the years, this one sister, she's absolutely brilliant, but I couldn't work out why she wasn't answering things. I couldn't work out why she wasn't responding, and it took me to kind of really become a geek around communication to realise that she's really thinking hard before she answers. And it's not that she's ignoring me, and it's not that she's in some way trying to find the right answer. She was really interested in getting it right. She wanted to make sure that whatever she answered was right, and that it tends to be about ideas and information rather than naturally talking about feelings and relationships. So quite different to the previous type of communicating style. So again, you might recognize yourself in this, you might recognize other people, or you might recognize elements of. It's not quite as straightforward as just one or the other. Then you get your connectors. So these people like to take time to relate to and connect with people. And again, you can probably even think of some jobs that people are more likely to be in with these kind of different styles. Tend to be friendly and approachable and welcome that conversation with others. So going back to the different types of media we talked about, maybe more comfortable in a face-to-face, that presentational kind of environment, because they're wanting to converse and to connect people together, and just for the sake of it, rather than a theorist who might prefer to do the communicating once they're sure of an answer or something. And they're tactful and considerate. So they do generally think about how they phrase something, and in terms of offending or not offending the other person. So it's all about the people with a connector, and understanding that people's motivations and the things behind the person. And then you get your purposeful communicators. So these tend to be the people that like to be really clear about what's going on and what the point of the conversation is. So and they prefer to stay on track with it rather than go off on a tangent, and take their time, but making sure that it stays in line with what the communication is about. No interrupting. They like ideas and issues, so they like it to be discussed in a logical way. So I definitely came across a purposeful communicator the other day on a Zoom meeting, and we were discussing. I think there's about 5 or 6 of us, different companies. We went from one company, and we were discussing an issue, and someone had said something, and then I went to respond, and I got promptly told off. Amy, can you wait your turn, because it's harder to me to write my meeting notes if you jump in now. I was like, oh, okay. So I had to sit quietly and wait my turn. Now I'm chuckling, but actually that was probably the best kind of person for the job. Otherwise, if we'd been able just to chat around the subject, we would have been there forever. So it's not about these differences, and different types of communicators are all important. All right, it's not about one better than the other. It's about that there are frustrations with the different types of communicators between styles, but actually, if I'd been given the task of chairing that meeting, we probably would still be here now. So I'm very well aware of my flaws, shall we say. And they prefer that communication to be practical and realistic. So it's very straightforward, and there's a time for that, and there's a time for the other, if you like. So with all of this, with the communicators, we know the communicators of different styles, different motivations. We know that we've got different mediums we can use, media we can use. We know the message we get across. So why is it then, in this age of hyper connectivity, that we still seem to have poor communication at times? And that goes across the board. I'm talking like personal and professional relationships. I'm talking about huge businesses, big corporations, right down to small companies. There's sometimes I don't think there's enough thought into what actually is communication, or the word communication is used just for in one context or one way. So the reason there's poor communication, or there may be poor communication, is what's known as the noise. Okay. And that there's different definitions for noise. So you do get your external noise, and those kind of things are anyone working from home with children at the moment will be aware. Or if you haven't got children, you might have had the pleasure of experiencing the noise from the other end of the line. So things like a child shouting for a snack, that's an external noise that could influence or affect the communication. It affects the message. Roadworks outside the window, just before we got on, actually there was something going on outside, some digger or someone started up, that could affect it, the communication, the message getting across. Just conversations in an office, that can really, especially if you're trying to focus on something and on an email, something like that, and then you've got all these conversations going on around you, that can affect the message getting across. You're hypersensitive to sound, which I know a lot of people that are. What might appear tiny little noises for most people actually are accentuated. So people tapping a table with a pen, extremely frustrating, extremely annoying. Just a cup clinking when you're trying to have a conversation with someone. So all these external noises can affect the message, and it can affect what the other person is getting from your message. Just bad internet connection. that itself is counted as a noise. So the amount of times one of my team lives in the middle of nowhere, and every time we started a Zoom conversation, in fact, we've got a little award ceremony we're doing next week, and one of the awards is for the worst internet reception, because that can affect the communication going on. Now we can laugh about, you have to have a sense of humor when it comes to these things, yeah, absolutely, but it does affect the communication. So all the external things going on can affect the communication, but there is also the internal noise that goes on that affects our communication. So I mentioned emotions earlier, but they do affect things. So the frustration about how bad your internet is as much of a noise, as much of a something that can affect the message than the bad internet connection itself. I've seen laptops go flying across the room because of that, and I understand that frustration. Cultural differences or the meaning of communication terms can cause noise. So for literal thinkers, idioms, phrases, anyone who's had to sit with someone with business jargon which doesn't necessarily make any sense at all, any abstract language, it can be meaningless and confusing. So what you intended someone to understand, or what you intended the message to be, is completely lost in that kind of internal noise, because the language used isn't right for the receiver. It's not right for the person decoding that message. And the different frames of reference or experiences. So, for example, when I was over in Brazil doing a few months voluntary work, if I sat in a group and I asked the question, what languages do you know? The answer most likely would be linked to whether we spoke French or Portuguese or German. Now, if I asked you, what languages do you know? I suspect you might have a different definition of the word languages, and I might get a completely different answer. So the point is, our frames of reference, our experiences, what we know has an effect. That's the internal noise. It'll have an effect on the message and decoding that message. So it's really important to kind of take all that into account when you're thinking about what you're using. So when we come to it then, so I'm getting there. So real versus virtual, that's the real question. So if we take all of that into account, we've got the process itself, we've got the media, we've got the communicators and all the elements going on with them, and then we've got the context and potentially the noise going on, external and internal. And this is very simplified. There is a lot more to it, but for today, let's just say we've got all those things going on. And I think it's important to consider all of those elements when you're looking at, well, is real better than virtual, or the other way around, or a bit of both. So some of the things over the last few months, that just from observations and talking with lots of different people about it, is that sometimes it's worth considering the types of communicators you have in your teams. There are different ways you can find out what kind of communicators there are. There are questionnaires and things, but also you may just kind of know the people. But knowing how they communicate and that style will be important. And the important thing is it might be different to yours. So one of my team members has absolutely thrived in the lockdown environment. It really, really suits her for different reasons, but actually she prefers that purposeful communication, and I'm more aware of that now than I was before. So I have to consider that when I'm thinking of the different types of medium we're going to use moving forward, but also the preferences. And if you're not sure what your team members prefer, if you are a manager, then ask what, and make sure that the answer is allowed to be anything. Make sure that it's a safe place to say, actually, I prefer to communicate in this way. Equally, if you know how you prefer, make sure your manager knows that as well, or make sure your colleagues know that. One of my team really didn't like Zoom for a long time. She just couldn't stand Zoom. We did some training on it, but we gave her options about whether she wanted to use a different media until she was comfortable. So I think it's really important to know how best someone's going to be able to communicate. And not just what you like, but what you need. So it would be easy, if you like communicating just from a technological point of view, it would be easy just to say, I'm just going to do that from now on. But it's important to look at all the elements and making sure that, as well as what you like in that way of communicating, whether or not longer term that's going to be what you need, and not seeing anyone for a long time, what effect will that be? Equally, if you like face-to-face, is that going to be useful all the time, or actually is it better to get some of the technology and make use of the technology, even if it's not your preferred method? And one of the things you do have to consider, resources available. So like I said, sometimes the internet wasn't helpful, but especially working, if you're working remotely or in a rural area, but also things like the hardware, looking at, have they got access to the laptop, have they got access to what they need, and is it useful have they got the space in terms of in their house if they're working remotely as well. So it's thinking about the resources available, and also training. If there is some, if you want to move to that way, is there anyone in your team that's going to need some training or some more help with some of those ways? Equally, if you're moving back to more presentational face-to-face, is there anyone that needs some training in how to be more assertive or how to get their point across in a group? Because you don't want to lose all those ideas that you've just been getting all this time. So really important to look at that as well. But it's about when you monitor as well. So it's about monitoring other people's and your well-being and relationships, as well as productivity, not just looking, can we be more productive, but also, are we okay? Are they okay? And maybe considering that a blended approach. So how much of each might be worth looking at. And this is all going to be about what's right for you and your company, as opposed to what is the right way. And I think the other thing, say, is not to be scared to have a go at something and adapt later based on the feedback. So I think it's a case of keep that loop going in terms of communication with whoever you're working with, to make sure that you're hearing what is working and what isn't. I know a lot of people that absolutely loved online communication at the beginning of lockdown, and now they're really desperate to see people in real life. Equally, I know other people that are going, why haven't we done this all the time? And they're scared that they're going to be forced to go back face to face all the time. So it's really important to have a go, but also listen. And please consider the message is going across. So if you're going to make someone redundant, for example, maybe not WhatsApp. I think it's about being a little bit sensitive to what's being said. So if it's a personal message, or if it's something where you need to be a bit more human and a bit more warmth with it. I know some of the bigger companies have managed to kind of get rid of whole teams via a Zoom conference call. Yeah, efficient, absolutely. Effective, probably. Whether or not it's right for the in terms of the human element of that company, I don't know. You'd have to ask the workers got made redundant. But I think it's important making sure that whatever the message is, you're getting the right type of medium to match that. Okay, so I will look at that. I'm not too bad at all. I'm getting there. So in conclusion then, that communication, it does involve a complex process. It's not as easy as we'd like. It isn't as simple as, if I give you the message, you're going to get what I'm talking about, and then that's fine. You're going to do exactly what I need you to do. It's not as simple as that. And the different types of media that we've got available can assist to become more efficient and effective if used appropriately. And maybe think about the different elements of the process. And look, when you look at the communication strategy, so not just can I get my message across, but are the people, the communicators involved, are they comfortable with the way that this message is coming across? There have been plenty of examples over lockdown where there's been miscommunication via email, for example, which actually, if it had been done in a slightly different way, or with a different media, would have been less. It would have caused less issues. So, and then to monitor and adapt that based on effectiveness as well as efficiency. So, how effective is it? Not just how quickly can I communicate it. Okay, so there's a couple of acknowledgements, and there's our contact details if you want to get back. So, I think, is that okay for quick Q&A now, Alex? Is Alex there? If anyone's got any questions.
Sure, thank you. Thank you.
Like
moment of question time. I think I've kind of got a question, and it's around kind of tone,
Okay.
and how you kind of identify tone in text messages, basically text-based messages. So one of the things I struggle with is kind of, I don't know, identifying it. Like I'll sit there and, like you say, I'll sit there and stare at a message. I'm probably one of those thinkers, and sit there and stare at a message and kind of try and work out every possible which way or perspective that message could possibly be construed. And then I find myself in a complete time of like paralysis, basically, where I'm like, and are spending too much time then trying to overanalyze the communication. So I guess it's where is the line to kind of draw with kind of trying to analyze how that tone is going to be taken, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, because I think there's been probably more miscommunication done by a written message for that reason, and a lot of it will come down to the emotional state of the person sending it and the emotional state of the person receiving it. And if you can't see those in real time, or when the person actually picks up that message, it can be misconstrued. You're right, and that over-analysis it's not a bad thing, but then it stops you actually sending the message anyway. So yeah, I'll prove it. So I think what has amused me recently is the kind of increased use of emojis, which I can't keep up with. I have to be honest. I keep misusing them all over the place. But something like that actually isn't necessarily a bad thing, because that little winky smile, although it seems really simplistic, it can make a massive difference to the message. However, in certain circumstances, not so appropriate. If you want to be very professional, you're not going to add an emoji. So I think part of it is knowing
again,
the other
redundancy
person.
notices.
Yeah, not good. or I think there's one with the kind of crying with laughter one, which a friend of mine misconstrued as should be crying. So she'd kind of put it where someone had been like upset with something, and she'd use the crying with laughter, and like completely inappropriately. But that's another example of how actually just because we've moved from face to face, it doesn't mean we're better at communicating. So I think partly it's having the relationship, or knowing the other person a bit. So being able to kind of use that knowledge to decide whether they're going to get, because I love sarcasm. I'm one for sarcasm, but there have been many occasions where I've had to kind of very quickly backtrack and say I was just joking, it's knowing the other person. And also, if you're face to face, you can read to a certain extent if it's been misconstrued. But yeah, on a written form, unless you know the other person, it's probably safer to keep to straightforward talk, and use the sarcasm and the little kind of comments later on when you know that they're gonna get it. And then also it's the recognition that we're human. So if you do get it wrong and they seem upset, say, oh, I didn't mean it to come that way, I'm just sorry, this is what I intended. So I think that's the thing, don't worry about it, do it. And if they're reasonable people, they're going to appreciate that communication is difficult. So yeah, very tricky though. I think there's another.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of questions, or a question in chat from Sebastian. Do you want me to read it? I'll read it out. For YouTube's, in my company, we are achieving good results with video calls and emails, etc. But there are some tasks that are better suited to face-to-face. An example we had was a brainstorming session. Without being able to meet face-to-face, do you have any tips and tricks to overcome the shortcomings of technological communication compared to the benefits of presentational communication?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, and I'm exploring this all the time because I'm using this more and more. So a couple of things we've done, if it's that kind of more spontaneous, is almost present the kind of conversation beforehand. Now, that doesn't seem like it's going to be spontaneous, but it gives time for those thought processes, so that when you come to that kind of form of the technology, people have already started to go through the conversation themselves, and those thought processes themselves. But also what I've been using is like if you use something like Zoom and you can have breakout rooms, sometimes it's easier to have those conversations in smaller groups, because I know for sure when you've got a lot of people on a conference call, it is essentially as if you've got a huge room of people, and it can be quite intrusive because in a face-to-face presentational kind of way, you can actually sit back and watch and observe, and not everyone can is aware that you're not contributing because you might be listening. So being able to use kind of breakout rooms for smaller conversations and then come to a kind of bigger conversation afterwards can be useful. But also, yeah, posing the problem or posing the kind of the topic, if you like, beforehand, to give a chance to kind of almost brainstorm individually, and even have colleagues have that question, but they can even contact each other, just to quickly double check something by phone or that kind of thing before you come to the bigger bigger meeting, because it can be quite daunting, even from this kind of point of view, to present to a bigger group. So maybe try those things.
I like that, kind of clustering it, and then kind of maybe assigning kind of leaders to those clusters or something, almost to bring them together. Cool. Oh, so Tim had a recommendation around using whiteboarding tools. So Teams has one built in. We've been using Miro, which works very well for brainstorming type sessions and is available in browser and the mobile app. That's pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and in Zoom they have a whiteboard as well, which is useful. Yeah.
News to my ears. Can't find it.
If you on share screen, I think it comes up as you can get whiteboard up. Can you find it?
Yeah, Miro works really well. You can see where everybody else is on the presentation. You can see their mouse moving around and stuff. And then as people are adding, you can just all add in the same place. You can add to each other's notes or whatever. So we found that really useful.
Oh, super.
Any more for any more before we drop off the stream? Gonna give it 3, 2, 1 general. Right, well, thank you everyone on the YouTubes for joining, and again, thank you, Amy. That was very informative. Enjoyed it very much. But yeah, bye-bye for now, YouTubers. Yeah, I guess we'll give them a wave.